Hi there, English students. I want to talk to you today about the three articles in the Death of a Salesman pack that my Year 12s have got. So Year 13s are really welcome to sit in on this, have a listen for revision, but very applicable for Year 12s and the work you've just done. I want to focus on a few points from each article and use those as ways that we can maybe develop our thinking on the play. So we're going to start with All Kinds of Greatness, which is the Tony Cavender article in the booklet. I picked out a few quotations that I thought would be worth looking at. Let's start down here, the tragedy of the low man. Now, Cavender's making a point here that Death of a Salesman is breaking the conventions of classical tragedy. I think some of us got that, some of us didn't get that. What does this mean? We need to go back to this original idea that when tragedy is first developed as a genre, your tragic hero has to be a great man. Why does a tragic hero has to be a great man? Because they have to fall. If you're going to fall, you have to be at a position of height to start with. So Cavender asks an interesting question here. If Willy Loman is a low man, which he is, his name says it, his position in society says that, how can he be a tragic figure? Now, I saw one or two interesting responses to that in your writing. So one person says, for instance, it's tragic that he was low to start with, which is a really interesting idea. It needs developing because we need to say, well, this is a new kind of tragedy. That's not the standard way that tragedy works. But if we look at society and say there's a whole bunch of people who are trapped at this low level, that's a kind of tragedy. That's okay. That's a reasonable interpretation, but it's a kind of a redefinition of tragedy, and we need to be aware of that. And that gets quite complicated, really. But there's a complication we should deal with. Tragedy is not stable. There are different kinds of tragedy which you need to be aware of and you need to think about. But let's supposing that Willy Loman is, in a sense, a more traditional tragic hero. Does he have a fatal flaw? Well, Cavender says he does have a fatal flaw. Sometimes I'm a little bit suspicious about this whole idea of the fatal flaw. I think they can be a bit artificial. I think it can limit the way that we think about the complexity of characters. I think people in good plays don't have one defining weakness. They're a whole complicated collection of strengths and weaknesses. But nonetheless, it's a starting point for thinking about characters, and it's a traditional way. So what do you guys think that Willy Loman's fatal flaw is? There are several potential candidates. Cavender picks one. And what Cavender says, that is, and I don't know how well you're going to see this, but I'll hold it up anyway, that it's his inability to accept reality is his fatal flaw, which makes sense. It does seem to be part of his breakdown in a big way. We can think about is this what's really caused him to fall? Or is it a response to that fall, a kind of a coping mechanism? Once we start to have those debates and questions, I think things get interesting. I want to suggest that his inability to accept reality is, in a peculiar and strange way, a kind of a greatness. And that sounds like an odd idea, because aren't we looking at mental breakdown here? Yes, we are. But we're also looking at a person who refuses to accept the way things are and believes themselves to have a kind of glory, and also believes that Biff, his son, is a kind of hero. He calls him a kind of Hercules at one point in the play. He sees him, has a vision of him really as a kind of a godlike figure. And ultimately, I would agree that these are delusions, that these are mistakes and errors. But there is a kind of a passion behind these visions of individual greatness, which I find compelling, really. There is an ambition in the souls of Willy and kind of Biff, because when Biff wants a different life, when he wants to reject the standard, boring 9 to 5 that surrounds him, you could view that as a kind of a greatness. I've seen other people view it as an immaturity. Um, and certainly in the play, Biff sees himself as somebody who has failed to grow up, and I think that's a really interesting tension in the play. You know, the play doesn't say what's the right answer. Is the right answer to adapt and to conform and to live a simple life? That's Charlie's way. That's how Charlie gets through life, and he's happy and he's content, and his kids are fine. They live a great life. But I think Willie and Biff are reaching for something which is a kind of in their heads greatness. Um, and I think if we think back to Keats and what Keats tells us about the imagination and the subjective experience, we can't dismiss that. There is something tangible and powerful about Willie's lived reality because we experience it. Miller puts it on the stage. We kind of live in that world. The tragedy, of course, is that ultimately it isn't real and that it bursts and the whole thing collapses. But I like this idea personally that his greatness and his fatal flaw are kind of wrapped up in each other. That's a very standard idea in tragic analysis. Aristotle thinks that your greatness creates your tragic flaw. And I think there's ways that we can see that that's true of Willie. So lots of people pick that the first essay as the most useful one. I could see why, because it's kind of connecting through to those kind of standard tragic elements of hamartia, fatal flaw, protagonist, and the idea of greatness. I think is really interesting in the play. It's a word that crops up time and time again, the word greatness. So Miller's clearly thinking about it. I don't think he gives easy answers about what it is exactly. Second essay was also by Cavender, Love for Sale. Worth noting, he's kind of taking a political angle on the treatment of women here, what you might broadly call a Marxist angle. The way that women have been commodified. They've been turned into things which can be bought or sold or traded. I wonder if that limits the reality of the play a little bit. Is that all that Linda is? I kind of see more in her than that. I mean, Cavender does acknowledge that she is loved and she is important in the play, but let's not oversimplify the play, and let's remember that in many ways Linda is at the heart of this play. She's kind of in the middle of this collapsing network of family relationships, doing her best to hold it together, ultimately failing, of course, and we can see that as her tragedy. There's one little bit that it kind of bugs me in the play, really, because I don't know the answer to it, and Cavender touches on it, and he gives a clear answer to a question that I've had. You remember when we were in the restaurant and the boys are meeting Willie, and before Willie arrives, a girl arrives, okay? And she's called by Stanley, the waiter. She and her friend, they're called the Chippies. Bit of slang, bit of New York 1940s slang. Now, if you look that up in glossaries of the play and in notes, it means prostitute. And I don't know if she is, or whether that's just kind of a piece of misogynist, abusive kind of just, this kind of slut or this trollop or whatever that's come in. You know, I think she's kind of a good time girl. She's out there. She's looking for a man. Whether she's trading, whether she's doing business, I don't know. Cavender, in his article, assumes that she is, and that she is trading, and that she's selling herself. It's possible. I don't think so, really. I think you've got two people in that restaurant. The girl, happy. They're looking for pleasure. They're looking for an easy relationship. That they're drifting through. They're connecting. I don't know what you think. I guess it's not a question that's easily answered. It's not the biggest thing. But Cavender goes to the assumption that she's a prostitute because it fits in this idea that women are commodities in the play. It's all about buying and selling yourself. I suppose if we kind of go into the depths of the play, ultimately, of course, Willie is buying and selling himself. He is what the salesman sells ultimately is himself. He is kind of prostituting himself in a way. Um, and Charlie talks about what you can sell, what you can't sell, and you can't sell popularity. You can't sell being liked. Is what is Charlie's point. The final essay was Willie Loman and the Lost Frontier by David Lister. I really like this essay. I think the contrast between town and country, the city and the country, and nature and the countryside, is a powerful piece of symbolism in the play. Lister really usefully connects that to the history of America, the way that America was a frontier country. We know this from Western films, the idea of the cowboy. And that idea of a man in a huge, expansive, free nature is very powerful in the American psyche. It's kind of how it's one of the things they see as being part of their identity, really. Interestingly, it very much contrasts with what we might call the American dream of wealth, success, settled family. The cowboy is a loner, he's a drifter, he's somebody with no ties, no money, but great freedom. And of course, that's what Biff aspires to. Lister makes the point that there's a part of Willie that aspires to that as well. And I think that's a big part of his tragedy, really, that he doesn't know what he wants. He can't settle on one vision, one dream, one goal. So there's a part of him that goes back to his dad on the road with the flutes, not making a lot of money, but free and free to travel where he wants. And this is part of Willie's soul. And there's another part of him that loves the idea of being in his velvet slippers, like Dave Singleman, and he's living a life of luxury on the telephone, a piece of technology, and just making $1 million just by being popular. And there's a confusion there. I think there's a mismatch between goals and dreams. Biff's trying to sort that out. I think Willie's nowhere near it. Maybe Happy will be more successful because he doesn't have that dream of freedom and wildness, except his kind of sex addiction, his version of that, I guess, and maybe that's where his downfall will be. But I like the final essay because it made me think, really, and it's about presentation, really, and how Miller is using place and setting in a very symbolic way, in a very deeply metaphorical way. So there's this haunting line in the play, "The woods are burning, boys, the woods are burning." Willie says it a couple of times. Nature itself is being burned to pieces. That's himself, that's his life, that's his family, that's his community, that's everything. The world is being destroyed. So I thought that was a powerful piece of writing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about skills and where you go next with this, so this is particularly for Year 12s. Some people did the follow-up piece of final piece of writing in the task, which was which essay did you like best and why? Okay, which is most useful to you for understanding this as a tragedy? All three of these essays could be your favourite. Are you interested in the place of women? Are you interested in these kind of more traditional views of tragedy? Are you interested in this place of town and country? So there's no right and wrong answer to that. I'm asking all the Year 12 to do some repair. Look at your comments on the Moodle assignment, which are all there now, and do some handwritten paragraphs, sentences, rewrite the whole thing if you like. Not going to need that in. Again, that's for you to kind of ponder what I've said here, what I've said on your writing, and rewrite something for your notes, okay? Handwriting is what you're going to need for the exam ultimately. And I want to do some work in terms of expression with people talking about this links with, this links with, this links with. I'm not going to talk about it here, but I want to do some follow-up work on how can we sharpen that idea of how do we connect one thing to another thing. And I think once we stop saying this links with and actually defining what that link is and finding the right word to describe the link, I think people are going to level up a little bit and they're going to do something more interesting with connecting ideas with that AO4 stuff. So that's 15 minutes. That's good for me. That's good for you. Keep watching Tiber. Hope you're good. Hope you're settled. Hope you're working hard and keeping busy, keeping productive. And I'll be on touch on Tiber soon. At the minimum, every Monday morning, you're getting your bulletins. So keep safe, guys. Keep your social distance. And I'll see you online soon and in the flesh as soon as possible, I hope. Fingers crossed. Take care. Bye-bye.